Let's make my pizza dough.
Hi, right, welcome to my kitchen. This is my home kitchen, and I'm going to basically run through my entire dough process for you from start to finish. So hopefully this video might help you get a little bit more consistency with your dough, because that for me, when I was basically starting out, I was trying all these different recipes, all these different things, and consistency was an issue. So like I would do the same recipe time and time again. I'd do it once, I'd make a banging dough, then I'd try it again and I'd be like, that was rubbish, like what happened? So I'm going to talk you through a few little steps that's hopefully going to get you something consistent, show you my entire process, what I do and why I do it. And I'm going to talk you through a few different things like flour choices and stuff like that. So let's get started. We have basically the things that you're going to need to make a banging dough, to make my dough. You're going to need some scales. These ones can weigh, these are the scales I use. They're relatively cheap. I bought them on an online store. These can weigh up to 5 kilos of product. You're going to need some like smaller, like jewelry scales. So I've had these ones for ages. I like them because they sort of close down and protect themselves, because if I need to use them, it's got a little 50-gram tar weight here. These will weigh 0.0 of a gram, which is sort of what you need if you're going to, for the small yeast amounts we're going to be measuring. You're going to need some flour. This is the flour brand that I use, Dalla Giovanna. This one is a 00 flour. I actually blend my flour, so I actually only use in my dough mix, I'll probably use anywhere between 80 to 95% of this flour, and I'll blend in a slightly stronger one. This is the stronger flour I use. I don't have a bag of this because I buy it in 25 kilo bags. This one is Dalla Giovanna Uniqua. This is a Tipo 1 flour. It's a lot stronger than this one, and I use a certain amount of this to basically be able to push my fermentation slightly longer. So I use fresh yeast. This is what fresh yeast looks like, or compressed yeast basically. This is relatively cheap. I find I've always used this, and I prefer to use it because I know when it's good and I know when it's bad, basically. I get a kilo of this every 2 weeks. It's cheap. I only use a very small amount of it, but I know that this is fresh. I know that it's good. I know that it's not going to fail me. If you can't get this, you want to be using instant yeast. This is instant yeast. You've probably seen this. You can get instant or active dry yeast. Now, you don't want to use the active yeast really, because that's the one that needs activating in warmer water. So you can't just chuck it in. Instant yeast, you can just chuck it in with cold water into your mix and it will act like this. You need to use less of this than you do of this. So I'm going to be using 1 gram of this per kilo. And for this, you'd want about 0.3 to 0.4 of a gram per kilo of flour that we're going to use. And finally, you're going to need some salt. I use 30 grams of sea salt per kilo of flour, which we're going to use. And you're going to want one of these. This is, or something similar to this, an instant read thermometer. This one's called a Thermopen. Open it up. You may have seen me use this on some of my things, and basically you stab it into your dough and it will tell you the temperature. Now, right now, this room is what, 17.2 degrees? So in this room, yeah, like I just said, it's 17.2 degrees. I know that this room, with my heating, and in my house currently at the moment, it's about 18 degrees. So I have a prep kitchen over there, which is like my utility room, which is essentially my dough room. I have a larger mixer in there, and I only ever do a room temperature fermentation, okay? So I have to adjust my yeast levels to go with the temperature at which I'm fermenting the dough at, okay? Because I've always done this from home, I don't have space for like commercial fridges or anything like that. So my dough never goes in a fridge. And if you do want to put your dough in a fridge, then you need to be using the correct flour for the fermentation time that you're shooting for. And a lot of that comes down to the flour's W rating. And that's what I use. You know, I'm not going to go over technical with this. I might leave that for a later video. But basically, essentially, the flour's W rating tells me its strength value. Now, Dalla Giovanna, this one that I use, this is a 00. It is all legit. It's all good, approved by the pizza mafia in Italy. This one has a W rating of W310. Now, that tells me that this flour is actually designed, and it's made for like Neapolitan pizza. You might see on the packet, this one is made for making legit Neapolitan pizza. So this flour is designed up to about a room temperature fermentation for about 24 hours. Now, if I wanted to push that a little bit further, I generally, especially if I was doing room temperature, I'd want to use a different flour. Or what I do is I blend in a certain amount of another flour to push it a little bit further to get me the strength that I'm after. So not all flours are the same. If you just go to like the supermarket and buy a 00 flour off the shelf, that flour might actually be a 00 grade, so it's very fine, but that actually might be quite a weak flour. It might be designed for making pastries or cakes or like Italian cakes. So it might have a W rating of, say, I don't know, like 180 to 200, and it won't have the strength, it won't have the gluten structure and the strength to hold that dough together. So your dough essentially will, like when you mix it, when you make it, it'll feed and it'll have nothing to give, and then it'll just gas out and it'll go flat as a pancake, and it won't be strong, it'll rip, stuff like that. So you need to be using the correct flour for the process that you want. And my process is a room temperature fermentation. I try and stick to like a classic Neapolitan vibe. And basically in Naples in Italy, way back when, they wouldn't have had refrigerators. They wouldn't have had refrigeration to do like an extended fermentation or a cold ferment or something like that. And it's probably quite warm there. So they sort of would have done a room temperature fermentation. They would have adjusted the yeast levels, the hydration levels for the humidity and everything like that. And I actually spent 3 days at this mill in northern Italy in Piacenza, and I learned all about this flour. This flour is milled at a constant temperature of about 23 to 24 degrees, and that is where yeast likes to have its party as well. So getting back to the temperature, that's why I use this. So a lot of recipes you'll see will say like, turn your mixer on, mix for like 15 minutes, knead your dough with your hands for 15 minutes, okay? So if you're kneading, and if you're using your hands are like 30 degrees, right? You've got, your core body temperature is quite warm, and you're going to be causing friction when you're kneading it. Same with a mixer, the spiral mixer or a dough mixer or whatever with your hook, it's going to be causing friction. It's going to be causing it to heat up. Now, if your dough overheats, what's going to happen is the yeast is going to go, yay, let's have a party. It's going to start mixing with the water, it's going to start mixing with the flour, and it's going to start eating everything, right? And it's fighting out those little gases. And basically what happens is, if you haven't used a flour that's strong enough, what's going to happen is it's going to eat itself alive, and it's going to have nothing more to give. So it's just going to flatten out. And then the other thing is, if you haven't got your dough warm enough, like if it hasn't hit a certain like temperature, then the yeast doesn't get going, the party doesn't get started, so it can't kind of develop as you want it to. So for me, doing a room temperature fermentation, I stick for a final dough temperature when I'm mixing of 23 to 24 degrees. And I know that at that point, everything's started. And preferably, I'd like to ferment my dough at a room temperature of about 18 to 19 degrees. Now, at that temperature, I will be using 1 gram of fresh yeast per kilo of flour. And this is completely scalable, okay? It's called a baker's percentage. Now, I stick to about the low 60% hydration mark with my dough, okay? So normally a classic Neapolitan pizza would probably be in the sort of 58 to 62% hydration, depending on the flour they use, because they'll be using a flour that probably has a W rating of about 280 to 320 maybe for that sort of 24-hour fermentation. So I stick to the low 60s. I sort of recently have been doing about 61 to 62% with what I do, and that gets me a really lovely, beautiful 24 to sort of 28-hour fermentation with my process. Now, like, not all my timings are the same. So sometimes I'll be making dough, like right now it's 10 to 12. This is generally when I'd be making my dough. Say I've got my market on a Wednesday, I'd make my dough on the Tuesday around 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that, because I know that then it's got 24 hours until I'm starting serving the next day. And what I do is I do a bulk fermentation for the first sort of, 10 hours, like that. So a bulk fermentation means the whole mass of dough is put into a tub and it's fermented in bulk. And then what I do is about 8 o'clock at night, tonight or like on the Tuesday night, I would cut it, I would ball it, I would weigh it, and then it would stay at room temperature at about 17, 18, 19 degrees, preferably, for then the next day until I use it, which, you know, is kind of going to probably be a minimum of about 12, 13, 14 hours. At that point, it's ready to use and it's going to last. If I hold it at a good temperature at that 17, 18, 19 degrees, it's not just going to die on itself. It's going to have a lifespan. And you can make that go a bit further by cooling it down if you wanted to, but it is going to eventually sort of have a point where it's just going to give up. It's going to have eaten itself alive and it's just going to flatten out. So dough does have a lifespan, but don't worry about like being absolutely exact with certain things like the yeast level. If you've overdone it slightly, you can cool it down a little bit and sort of retard the dough to just go a little bit longer. If it's not quite ready, put it in a warm place and it will pump up a little bit more. So anyway, let's get into the dough making. So we're going to use a kilo of flour, and I've got a mixer here. So I've got this is a Sunmix Evo 6. It's like one of their like top range ones. I've always used Sunmix mixers. I have a 25 kilo one in my prep room, which will allow me to do near enough 100 dough balls in one hit. This one is a 6 kilo or a 6 litre. It will make 6 kilos of flour, of dough weight, final dough weight. It's all fancy, it's all touch screen. You can program mixes into this. It's pretty cool. It's got a light, it's got a thermometer, like an infrared thermometer. Mine's slightly out actually. You can change it, but I'm not going to be guided by that. Sometimes they need adjusting, and you can adjust the thermometer by like 10 degrees either way. You need to calibrate it, but the bowl's the bowl is probably about 14 degrees. It's actually probably reading about right. But anyway, so what we're going to do, we're going to use the mixer. These are pretty damn cool. This one's a bit fancy. They do a more basic one with switches and dials and stuff like that. But essentially, it's a professional mixer, just sort of scaled down. It's got really tight tolerances. A high quality mixer like this isn't going to overheat your dough as well. It's going to allow it to mix to temperature for like a lot longer in the mixer, so you can build up that gluten strength. So right, what we're going to do, we're going to start off with some water. So you're going to want a jug. I'm going to use cold tap water, as cold as it's going to go. There is like an equation you can use to kind of like, I can't even remember what it is now, but like you take your flour, you test your flour temperature and then you adjust your water temperature to that. But I don't really worry too much about that. You're going to see, like, I get a very consistent product every time, and I don't overly worry about those sort of things. In the summer months when my prep room gets really hot, I'll be using fridge temperature water. So I'll have like a 10 litre container, I'll fill it up with water, I'll put it in the fridge overnight, and I'll be using like 3-4 degree water, because my prep room might get up to 27 degrees, something like that, 25. Where I store my flour is in my garage as well, in my racking system. That can get very warm in the summer as well, so I need to use very cold water to bring that temperature down. And obviously the mixer is going to cause friction, it's going to heat it up. So what we're going to do, we're going to get some cold tap water. So get the cold tap going over here. We're going to tar off our, let's bring you down over here so you can see this. Right, here we go. I think that's going to be a good spot. Right, so here we have, we're going to tar this off, and I'm going to go with a 62% hydration, because that's what I've been running at the moment. Okay, so we're going to get our water. We're going to do 620 grams. I'm going to do everything in grams here, okay? So this is just cold tap water, which, there you go, 680. So let's just make sure we get it to about 620. 629, a little bit more. 626. Oh, let's keep going. Come on. 623. That will do. Right, we've got 623 grams of cold tap water here. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I like to start my water first. I'm going to tip the majority of this in. I'm probably going to hold back about 200. So there's about 200 grams, 204 grams there. I'm holding back. Okay. So let's get you a bit closer here so you can sort of see this as it happens. So you can see the mixer, you can see the screen. I'll bring the mixer a bit closer actually, that's going to be a bit easier. Okay, so we've got the mixer here. what we've got our water in. We're going to weigh out 1 gram of yeast, okay? Now, going back to the yeast, there is some really good yeast calculators online. There's some good apps and stuff like that. In the description, I'll actually, I'll put a little sort of table of temperatures and timings. Now, I'm always shooting for around 24 hours of fermentation time for what I do. And so what I'll do is I'll put in like a little yeast calculator for using fresh yeast. So I'm going to turn on our scale, and we're going to do, let's put this here so you can see this. Right, we're going to turn on our scale, and we're going to use 1 gram. So we're going to take our fresh yeast. It's going to be a small amount. It's going to be like a pea, like a small pea, a garden pea amount. So let's get that. That's 1.1. And like I said, this is completely scalable. There you go, 1 gram, bang on. And we're going to just drop that straight in. We're going to crumble it in a little bit, and we're going to drop that straight in. That will dissolve as this is spinning, okay? So this is, like I said before, about I was talking about the baker's percentage. So baker's percentage, we're running at 62% hydration, okay? So that is say our flour is always 100, it's going to be 100% of the mix, okay? So we've got 1 kilo of flour, that is 100%. We're using 62% hydration, means we're going to use 62% of that 1 kilo, that 1,000 grams. So we want 620 grams of water, okay? We're going to be using 30 or 3% salt. So there's 30 grams of sea salt in there. And our yeast level is running at, well, like 0.1% basically. So we're using 1 gram, okay? So what we're going to do, I am going to measure out some flour. And what I want is, I'm going to put on this scale here. And what I want to use, the Uniqua, this is I believe this is a TPO one. It's a very strong flour, has a W rating, I believe, of W340. So I'm actually going to put 10% of this into there. So 10% would be 100 grams, okay? So I'm going to use 100 grams of this, adding it to the mix. And what that's going to do, that's going to just give my flour a little extra strength to push it past that 24-hour fermentation, okay? So there's 100 grams there, and then I'm going to use 900 grams of our pizza flour, our 00. There's many other brands out there. I've just used this one for many years because I spent time at the mill. I know, I've seen the process, I've seen how it's made. I love this flour. I've been using it for ages, so, and I just know I get a very consistent, very good flavor product with it. So we're going to measure out now another 900 grams. We're going to take this up to 1 kilo. So 1,000 grams is going to go in here. 996, 999. Bosh, bang on, 1,000. So we've got 1 kilo of flour in there. Okay, what we're going to do, we're actually going to tip all of it in. So sometimes when I'm using a bigger mix, and I'm using my bigger mixer, I'd probably hold back a few kilos. If I'm doing, say, 10 or 14 or 15 kilo batch, I'd hold some back. So in there right now, we have the flour and we have the yeast. And what we're going to do, I'm just going to start this on manual mode. I'm going to get the speed and I'm going to start it at about 80 RPM. Going to hit play, we're at 80, and I'm just going to hit go, okay? And it's going to start mixing. Right, and this thing's just going to keep churning around, and it's going to start to mix it all together. It's going to bring everything together, and it'll take a little bit of time. And remember, I've held back some of that water, so I'm just going to let that form a dough. I might as well just talk you through what I'm doing now. Like I said before, I never mix to time, so I'm always mixing to temperature. So throughout this process, as it's starting to form a dough and form a pumpkin, I'll be using my Thermopen. And this is much the same. If you don't have a mixer like this, or like a dough mixer, if you're using your hands, same rules apply. Basically, we're shooting for temperature, we're not shooting for kneading for time, okay? Because we want to make sure this dough is going to be consistent and the party is all going to be started at the right time and the right temperature. So, see it starting to come together. It's forming like a sort of a shaggy dough a little bit. So I'm just gonna start to drizzle in a little bit more of the water just to help it pick up. And it's much the same. If you were mixing this in a bowl with your hands or on a surface, you probably wouldn't want to add all the water at the start. There you go. We've just held back a little bit now. We've probably got about 40 grams left, which we're going to actually save for when we dump the salt in a little bit later. So you see how quickly this starts to come together and makes a really nice dough. It's just picking everything up. It's kind of so the spiral, it hits the ripper and it sort of pushes the dough outwards. And it's just going to take a few minutes to start to come together. I'm not going to put any cuts in this. We're just going to see it as it happens. Should probably take, all in all, to get to temperature, this dough will probably take about 10 minutes. But like I said, I'm going to be guided by the temperature, and we're going to shoot for about 23.5 degrees. Okay. You see, it's all starting to pick it up now. If your dough is getting to temperature too fast, I mean, you don't want to run your mixer on like full speed. So this is a multiple speed mixer. You don't want to go straight in and go for like high speed. You want to give it time. You know, in Italy and Naples, they will be probably running their mixers quite slow. If they're doing like a room temperature, if the temperature of the pizzeria is hot, if they don't have AC, they'd be running it very slowly so it doesn't overheat the dough, so it doesn't form like you know, the friction. So they'll just let it go slowly. And you see it's coming together now. It's starting to form a nice dough. See if we can get you in a little bit closer so you can get a better view of this. See, it's starting to come together nicely now. It's starting to pick up everything. It's a little bit in the corners. It's not picked up, so just a couple of little bits. So what we're going to do, we're just going to drizzle in a teeny bit of water as it comes round, and that's just going to help pick up all those last little bits. There we got a dough forming now nicely, and we're just going to keep it on low speed. And let time just bring it together, shooting for that temperature. Like the tap water that came out of my tap was probably about 15 degrees. I think the flour temperature was in my garage. My garage is quite cool, so that's probably about 17. So this is going to take a little bit extra time. So I know we haven't formed like a nice looking dough, but I just want to keep an eye on that temperature. So I'm just going to check. Right, still, look, it's 16.8 on the instant read. So we're going to go back in. We're going to start again. We're 4.5 minutes in. So I've got a nice dough coming together there. I could kind of do with speeding up a little bit now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the speed thing. I'm going to take it up to about 130 RPM. Okay. So now it's just going to speed it up, and it's going to start to bring it together a little bit quicker. And remember, we're not at the full hydration yet. We still have a little bit of our water left, and we haven't even added our salt yet. So not adding the salt at the start, what it does, I save a bit of the salt, right? I save the salt to a little bit later on in the mix, because what that's going to do, it's going to actually help strengthen it as I add it a bit later, and it's going to build friction and it's going to build temperature. So I'll add my salt at sort of a different level. If I need it to pump the temperature up, I'll add it a little bit later on, kind of thing. If it's taking ages to get to temp, because that's the beauty of these mixers, because they're so good. They don't force the temperature up very quickly. They don't, like, the motor and stuff is far enough away from the bowl that it doesn't like make the temperature go crazy like some mixers do. So you see that we're starting to form like a nice little pumpkin now. We've basically got a nice clean bowl as well, and we've got this nice like pumpkin forming. You see it's ripping it and it's pushing it out and it's ripping it back in. It's gonna be a banging dough, I think, this one. So I'm just gonna go up with the speed a little bit more. So I'm gonna take it to 180. I'll let that rip for a little while. And like I said, this is the same process if you're using your hands. You're just going to keep kneading it on a surface, kneading it, until you get to the point where your dough is at like 23 to 24 degrees. That's probably only gone up like a degree or two, but let's give it a little check anyway. Let's see. Not even that. There you go. We're up at 17.9. We've gone up 1 degree, so we're almost at 18 degrees. So let's keep it going. When we get to about 19, I'll probably drop the salt in. And all the time, this is spinning it around. It's causing friction. It's causing it to heat up a little bit, and it's just going to keep going. And we're going to get a really nice, strong, elastic dough coming on here. It might make a bit of noise when I crank the speed up to like 210. This one can go up to 300 RPM, which is absolutely mad. See that? It's getting quite nice and smooth. It's getting even more like a pumpkin, as it were. It's forming that nice kind of shape. Just going to check that again. Go at 18.5, 18.6. So look. Push it in, make sure I'm getting a good core reading. 19 there. So we're ready for our salt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on and I'm going to add the salt as it's mixing. So we're just going to dribble in, we're going to drop the salt straight into the mix. And what that's going to do, that's going to build, I'm going to turn it up a little bit as well. So we're going to actually go to 210. And what that's going to do, that's going to start to build the strength. It's going to heat it up, but I want that to run for a minute, and then I've got the rest of this water. So I'm going to start drizzling this water. Now, if we were doing this by hand, we probably would have added the salt a little bit earlier, just to make sure that it does dissolve. But because it's in this mixer, it's going to dissolve pretty well. So I'm just going to add the rest of our water now. Just trickle it in, and this is just going to make sure it helps dissolve that salt and brings it all together. Right, that's all our water done now. And we're just going to let that twist now until we reach that magic temperature. You're going to see it's kind of like the water's made it sort of open up a little bit, and it's just going to start to come back together as a really nice, tight, smooth pumpkin. There you go. Give it a little temp check, see where we're at. So look, we're up at 20 now. So we've gone up a degree, 20.4. Okay, cool, right, we're getting there. And you see we're 10 minutes into the mix. I reckon that's gonna be another 2 or 3 minutes and that's gonna be done. So if I'd have just followed like a recipe that I might have seen online somewhere that says like chuck everything in, use warm tap water, for example, use active yeast, and then if I'd just let this rip for 15 minutes, it probably would have gone north of 30 degrees, and that dough will be going crazy at that point. It will be feeding too fast. and I'd probably end up with an overly fermented dough, because it's going to take a long time for it to get down to like the temperature that I want to ferment it at. So that's why I'd always say be guided by these things, be guided by temperature and not time. Right, we're 11 minutes in on the mix now. See, it's looking like quite nice and smooth now as well. This way. Just going to give that another temp check. We're at 11.5 minutes. It's at almost 22 degrees. 22.1. Going to keep it going. The reason this one's actually says 15 degrees on here, the reason it is because the infrared thermometer is actually quite far over here and it's not hitting the dough, it's probably still hitting the bowl. So it actually works a lot better. It's gone up to 16 now when the mixer's full. So if I have like 3 kilos of flour in here, this would be way more accurate. But that's why I don't trust the infrared so much, and I go by via the Thermopen. Okay, that's looking banging. Look at that. Beautiful little pumpkin. Right, let's check it out. Okay, where are we at? 21 there. That's 22.9. 23. That says 23.1. Right, we're going to give it another 30 seconds. And then I think that's going to be ready for resting, basically. Right, we're coming up to 13 minutes in. And like I said before, if you'd followed a recipe that said need for 15 minutes, it would have overdone it. If you'd have followed a recipe that said just need your dough for 10 minutes, probably would have underdone it. Right, let's have a look. Let's have a look. Right, where are we at? 23.5. There you go. We're 23.6 there. See that? You might be able to see it. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. But yeah, we're at 23.6, 23.7. Right, that's it. That dough is done. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave this in here for like 10 minutes, okay? At this point, it's going to be quite like a nice, like tight dough, but I'm just going to let it hydrate for 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that speed back down. Oh, wait a minute, what's it doing? Let's close it. It doesn't like it when it's open. I'm going to bring that speed back down to, where are we? We're going to go to 70. Okay, so we're going to just stick at 70. And what I'm going to do is, after 10 minutes, I'm going to give this one turn of the bowl. So for now, come talk to me. Yeah, so that's going to now rest there for 10 minutes. It's going to basically hydrate. It's going to take on all that water. It's going to just do its thing. It's going to relax. It's going to chill. And then what I'll do is I'll just give it one turn of the bowl before I pull it out. And then I'm going to put it in a container. Now, for business, what I do when I'm doing this in my prep room, I will split my dough up into containers like this. Each one of these will take probably, this is what, 13.5 litres, and I'll ferment my dough in one of these. I prefer to break it up into smaller portions. So what you need to understand is, if I took all of my dough, like if I took 15 kilos of flour, like near on 25 kilos of dough out of my professional mixer, if I dunk that into one big bucket, okay, and then I wanted it to ferment at a certain temperature, that's a big bulk of dough. The core of that dough is gonna not get to the temperature I want it as like the outsides are. So a lot of people who do cold fermentation, for example, they might take like a big vat of dough, slide it into like a walk-in fridge or a fridge. But what you got to understand is the bigger that vat of dough, the longer it's going to take for that temperature, that cold temperature, to get to the middle of it. Okay, so it's all going to ferment at different times and it's going to be funky. So breaking it up into smaller amounts is a lot better, especially if you want to get into the cold fermentation. If you want to do like a 24-hour, 72-hour one, it's better to have it in smaller amounts, especially if you're going to slide it into the fridge, because it's going to take longer for that temperature to become stable, for the whole dough to cool down to that temperature. So I split mine up into smaller ones, but today that's a bit big. We're going to use one of these. This is what I usually put my sauce into it. This is a 5.5 litre like gastro tub. We're going to put the dough into this. We're going to put a lid on it and we're going to leave it now for about 9 hours until I ball it up. And that's going to basically let it like chill out. It's going to let it start to bubble up. It's going to sort of grow a little bit. It's going to be still quite easy to handle. It's not going to be too leery or anything like that, too like bubbly. Because if I was to try and ball this like straight away, it'd be too tight. It needs like at least a couple of hours really to relax. Like classic Neapolitan pizza. You mix it, you generally leave it for like an hour or two, then you ball it up, and then you'd use it sort of anywhere from sort of 10 or 12 hours later. But we're going to extend the fermentation to a 24-hour period, and that's why I've used the small amount of the Tipo one, the Uniqua Blue flour. If you can't get these flours, if you can't get the Dalla Giovanna, just make sure that you get a similar vibe, okay? Like a flour, like you don't have to blend them. I enjoy blending my flours. I kind of have to, because I'm working with all different temperatures all the time. The food truck can go from sort of a solid 18 degrees in the dead of winter inside it when I'm making pizza, all the way up to like 60 degrees C in the middle of the summer. So, and because my prep room, because I do it in my house, I don't have like air conditioning. But I'm in the UK, we very rarely have air conditioning, because we hardly ever need it. My van gets hot, it gets cold. I'm doing this on the street, so I need to adjust my recipe all the time. So the yeast level changes constantly, and like my blend of flours. So for example, like these two, so I worked on Tuesday and I worked on Wednesday this week. Tuesday I did a dough, I used 10% of the Uniqua. Wednesday I had to make the dough for my Wednesday market ever so slightly earlier by about 4 or 5 hours. So I needed that fermentation to hold together a lot longer. So what I did is I actually used 15 to 20% of the Uniqua in the mix instead of the 10% I usually use, because I knew that was going to be a longer fermentation and I wanted to get a consistent product. So my yeast level had to change ever so slightly to combat that as well. And going back to the yeast thing, there is like so many good little calculators out there. There's a couple of apps online. There's a really good one that a lot of people swear by and use called Pizza App, which you can put in like the values, but essentially it's just a yeast calculator. If you go onto your search engine onto Google and just put in like dough yeast calculator, it will kick out one, and you can sort of look at the fermentation time you're looking for and kind of the hydration level, and it will tell you how much yeast you should be using. So, but for a 24-hour fermentation, about room temperature of about 18 degrees, 1 gram of fresh yeast will like work wonders, and that's what I've used today. So yeah, we're just going to let that chill out for a little bit now, kind of like spread itself out a little bit. It's relaxing, it's doing its thing, it's chilling out. And what we're going to do is we're going to get it together. We're going to give it one little turn in a minute when it's ready to go. So another few minutes. Usually I set a time. My mixer in the other room has like a little time dial. And so what I'll do is once the mixer's done, once it's finished mixing, it's hit temperature, I'll just turn it to 10 minutes. I'll go make myself a coffee. I'll go do something else, and then it'll go bing. And I know it's ready to go back and take it out and pull it from the mixer. So not long now. We'll give it another couple of minutes, and then we'll give it a turn. Okay, so whilst that's still chilling, we've got like 2 minutes left. Going back to the flour. So if you want to experiment and do some sort of funky doughs, if you want to do like an extended fermentation period in the fridge, like a 2-3 day ferment, just make sure you're using the correct flour. I see it so many times that sort of people are like, oh, what's happened to my dough? I did 3 days in the fridge and they used, say, you know, a Caputo pizzeria flour, which is W290, let's say, and that flour is designed for a room temperature standard, like classic Neapolitan dough, so up to max a 24-hour fermentation period, and they've gone and slapped it in the fridge for like a couple of days, and what's happened is it doesn't have the strength to go that far. Like, some people might be doing that and getting a great product. They might actually, it might be working for them, but you'd be better off using a different flour, like usually a red bag is slightly stronger, something in the W340 to sort of W360, 370 mark, something like that. To get these strength values, usually you have to look at go on the website, have a look at the sort of the protein content, everything like that. So the higher the W value generally means that it's got a higher strength level, a higher protein content. And it's going to be great for sort of my style of pizza. If you wanted to make like a more of a cracker crust, something a little less, with a little less chew, like a Neapolitan pizza, if you want to do like a slightly more cracker, then you might want to use more of an all-purpose flour, something it's a little bit weaker maybe. If you can't get like Uniqua, which is what I use, like I'm doing this to show you my process to make my dough, and this is how I do it. You can use a Manitoba flour, which is very, very strong. You might only need like 5% of that to push this a little bit further, or just use one single flour that's like W320, W330, something like that. Just whatever you can get, just make sure it's a good flour that's designed for the process that you want to do, okay? That's really important. And it's going to hopefully get you a consistent thing, a consistent dough, because remember, we're shooting for temperature and not time. And this to me is probably the most important thing. Like, it's one of my most important tools that I need. Without this, my dough wouldn't be anywhere. So I've actually got a couple of these ones. This is the pro version. It's called a Thermopen. There's millions of others out there. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I've just always used them. I use them to nail like my steak temperatures. I use them like if I'm cooking fish, if I'm using like one of my pizza ovens, my Gosnies to cook something like a big chunk of meat. I'll always be using a Thermopen because I know that these things read instantly. They're spot on, and yeah, this is what you need. Okay, so I think that's had about 10 minutes now. So what we're going to do, we're going to check it out. We'll let you track down here. So actually I'm going to do this bit here. So here we go. Right, I'm going to give this dough like one turn of this, okay, and you're going to see it's going to bring it all together. So we're going to go one turn at 70 RPM, maybe 1.5, okay. It's going to be quite slow, and you're going to see it's going to start to bring it all back together. And what this is doing, this is like folding the dough, okay. It's like just building strength. So that's probably 2 turns now. So that'll do. We're going to stop that. So we've put our pumpkin back out, and we've got our pumpkin out, and then what we're going to do, we're going to pull this from the dough, from the mixer, okay? So we're just going to grab the dough out, and we're going to put it on a surface. You see it's coming clean out the mixer. You see how clean that mixer is? So that mixer now just needs like a little wipe down. Just get like a damp cloth, wipe it out. Doesn't need anything else doing to it. Okay, so we've got our dough out the mixer. See, it's looking a little bit like shaggy. So this is where we're just going to strengthen it. We're just going to give it a couple of folds. We're just going to fold it in on itself, and we're just going to get it a nice, smooth, tight ball. Okay, we're just literally, it's not sticking to my hands. It's beautifully smooth, nice and tight. And you see this, it's not overly hydrated. I'm not into massively overhydrated wet doughs. So that now is ready for its bulk fermentation. You see that? It's springing back up. Really nice, smooth. It feels nice and smooth. It's and you see the little bubbles that are already forming in there. So that dough is ready to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to get our container, going to shove it in there. So our dough is done. So we've pulled it from the mixer, we've just given it some strength, we've just tightened it up into a nice dough ball, we put it in a tub, we're going to put a lid on this, we're going to leave it sort of 9-10 hours, and then we're going to ball it up, and then we'll be using it the next day, okay? It's going to sit in a room temperature of about 18 degrees, which is what it is in here, which is perfect. But going back to the flour, again, Dalla Giovanna 00 and Dalla Giovanna Uniqua Blue Type 1 flour, so type 1. This in here, this was 620 grams of water for 1,000 grams of flour. So that means this was 62% hydration. I took my 1,000 grams of flour, I added 620 grams of water, we added 1 gram of fresh yeast or compressed yeast, and we added 30 grams of salt. That is it, that's all it needs. We shot for a final dough temperature of 23 to 24 degrees, which actually took us about 13 minutes. We rested it for 10 minutes. We gave the bowl one final turn, and that's just brought it all back together. It's given it a bit of life, it's given it a bit of strength, and then we folded it on the table and we put it in here. This now, like I said, will rest for up to 10 hours, and then I'm gonna ball it up, and then I'll be using it about 14 hours later. So that is our 24-hour dough ready to go, okay? I hope that was helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you get on. Like, I'd love to see what you make, see if you can make the same thing. But for me, for consistency, for simplicity, this dough has been perfect for me. I've been doing the same process for years and years, and it's never let me down. So I hope you enjoyed that. Once again, thank you very much and have a lovely day. Bye. Okay, we're back. So it's the evening. It's actually, just coming up to 9 o'clock. Kids are in bed, and I'm going to ball up the dough for you now. So as you can see, it's a bit dark out here. So yeah, come down here and we will ball it up, and I'll show you what we're going to do. Right, so we've got our bulk dough here. See, it's flattened out a little bit. And it's just sort of, it's puffed up a little bit basically. So we're going to take it out. So I'm just going to get my hands down in this tub. I'm just going to break it out basically. Can just turn this upside down and it will just flop out. But I should be able to just get my hands underneath it and pull the whole thing out. Look at that. See, it's coming out. There we go. And that's actually what I'm after. I'm after like a sausage, like a snake. Now, normally when I do this, I have like a big bulk amount of it, and what I would do is I would cut a snake basically to a certain length. So what I'm going to do, I've got the snake here, I've got my scales. We're going to tar this off, so we're ready to go. I normally shoot for about 270 grams. We've got a dough tray here. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can cut and just cut down, but what I like to do is I like to grab the sausage, and what I do is I kind of like tuck it under, and I like squeeze off a portion like that, and then that's one done. So what I'll do is I'll weigh that. That's 278 grams. I don't know if you can see that. If I put it around this way, you'll be able to see a lot better. It's a little bit over, so what I'm going to do is just going to pinch off a little bit till I hit that 270 mark, and then I'm just going to put it into there. So I'll do another one, just roll it over. Usually I wear gloves when I'm doing this because it means it doesn't stick to my hand. Where are we at? 282, 277, just get to 270. And this should do us we should get about 6 dough balls out of this. That's going to be over 300, look at that, way over. 280, 267, just take a bit, add a little bit. And this dough tray will fit 6 dough balls. It fits in a domestic fridge as well. It's quite a nice little one. It's basically a half size of my professional ones. So I'm a little bit off here, 294, 270, there we go. Last one. Just get that, or last 2, just pinch that off there. 282, 284, what's that, 275, I'm doing this upside down. 269, OCD will go mad. And then last one should be about 281, so we'll just get rid of a little bit. And there you go. So, right, what we've got here now, we have a tray of dough balls. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave them. So when I'm doing this, I'll cut and weigh, like, I might be cutting and weighing up to like 100 plus of these. So I'll just go through each tray, and I'll do it in a dough tray. So I dump all my dough into the tray. I cut it in the tray because I've got small space, small prep room, and I start loading up the dough trays. I'll stack them up like 5, 6, 7 of them, with 15 per tray. And then what I do, they'll have a little bit of a relax now, so they're just going to chill out, they're going to mellow out, because I've just strengthened them basically by rolling them. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to leave them for 5 minutes, maybe 10. I'm going to put a lid on it, and then I'll come back and then I'll re-roll them. And then what that's going to do, that's going to let them just chill, and then they're going to smooth out. You see all of this nice little funkiness. Essentially all I've done is I've just cut them and weighed them. And like I say, you could have just gone through and chopped them and then weighed them and done that. So this is just the portioning phase. And then we're going to come back and we're going to ball them up. So 5 minutes, we'll be back. Okay, I'm wearing gloves. It's been 5 minutes later. They have just slightly relaxed. They've chilled out a little bit, and we're going to just give them a little reball. So just going to pick one up, and I'm just going to show you this. So I'm just going to ball them up like this. And I'm just going to basically tighten them up and seal them up. And just give it a little squeeze at the bottom. See that? I'm just going to squeeze it up like that. And you see that ball? See how smooth that is? And beautiful. And we're just going to go through each one. And this is what I do. The night before I serve on the market, or like if I'm doing a private event like a wedding, I'll do this in the morning. So they've got all day. And these will just sit overnight in my prep room like this. So tomorrow morning this dough will be good to go, and it'll be ready, I would say, at its best. I'll be shooting for about midday. So this now would have, where are we? We're at like 9:30. This dough is going to have the best part of kind of like 14 hours until it's ready now. And what's going to happen is that's going to spread out, they're going to like puff up, they're going to sort of end up touching each other, which is fine, and they're going to make banging pizza. So there you go, there's my dough balls. You want to evenly spread them out. You don't need any flour, no oil, nothing like that in the tray. Absolutely clean tray. So what we're going to use like a scraper. You see I normally use a metal one, and you've seen it before. You cut down each edge, use a little bit of flour, cut down each edge, scoop it out, and then make your pizza. So that's it, that's the dough. That's my complete dough recipe done. So that's it, that's the dough. It's been balled up. That was my complete dough recipe, start to finish, all the way through to balling it up. Like I said, 14 hours later this can be ready to serve. So I hope that was helpful, hope you enjoyed it. See you later.